Hello everyone, and welcome to today's learning session, Expectations for REDD at UNFCCC COP19, organized by World Wildlife Fund's Forest and Climate Program. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. My name is Breen Burns, and I'm a Program Officer for Learning and Communications. Our presenters today are John O. Niles, Director of Climate and Forests for WWF-US, and Josefina Braña Varela, Policy Director for the WWF Forest and Climate Program. So, before we begin, I'd like to share a few housekeeping tips and reminders. Today's presentation is being recorded, and you can access the recording within a few days on our YouTube channel. To find the recording, simply go to youtube.com and search for WWF Forest and Climate, or go to our website, panda.org/forestclimate, and look for the REDD learning section, and you'll find a link to the recording there. There are two audio options. You can listen via your computer speakers, or you can dial in through the number that was provided in your registration email. It's important to note that if you're experiencing audio difficulties while listening via your computer speakers, this is sometimes caused by having multiple internet or software windows open, so please feel free to close some of those, or you're always welcome to join via phone. If you're having any technical troubles, please feel free to send me a chat message if you can, using the control panel on the right. Questions are absolutely welcome. Please submit your questions for Josefina and Jono through the toolbar on your screen, and we will answer as many as possible during our allotted time. And for anything that we don't get to cover, you're invited to post them to our online REDD learning platform, reddcommunity.org. And after the webinar, you'll receive a link to the place on that website where you can post your questions. So thank you again for joining us. And with that, I'll get started, and I will turn it over to Jono.
Thank you, Breen. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Today we're going to walk through what we expect to happen or hope to happen at the negotiations in Warsaw, which kick off in about a week. So here are the basic topics that we're going to cover. I'll be talking about the Subsidiary Body for Scientific and Technological Advice and the various agenda items under that body. And then Josefina is going to talk about the joint Substa SBI process, as well as the Conference of the Parties work program. And then we'll have a few concluding thoughts, and then I think Breen has asked us to preserve about 15 or 20 minutes for questions and dialogue at the end. So, so getting into Substa, we're going to assume that most of the people on the call have a pretty good understanding about some of the technical acronyms. But before we give you a brief overview of WWF's vision for REDD, and so we've put that up on the screen. It's kind of a high-level reminder to our people in offices and all the people that we talk to about what we hope REDD can actually achieve. So there's also a link for more policy and information down at the bottom of that last screen. So the negotiations that will kick off on Monday cover a lot of ground, and so we just wanted to put up a quick overview of some of the key issues and where they are housed, which body or bodies they fall under. And then this is also the basic structure of the talk that we'll be giving. So you can just get sort of a roadmap for what big topics are coming up and what process they sit under. So let's jump into the Substa work. Sorry, but before we jump into the Substa work, here's the overview of sort of WWF's kind of expectations for what we'd like to see come out of the negotiations regarding REDD. The main message is that we really would like to see the basic design elements that are needed, such as reference levels and measurement, reporting, verification systems, guidance on national forest monitoring, social safeguards, things like that, really firm up, especially under the Substa track. These are issues that have been worked on for 4 or 5 years, and some of them are a couple of years late coming to fruition. So we'd like to see those get tied up, what we call sort of the technical components, and then we really would like to then see that enable the negotiators to move on to sort of the institutional and financial issues. These have been held up largely because of the larger negotiations around the global architecture of a deal. But we think once the technical elements are in place, we can also, the negotiators will have some confidence to move forward, starting to think about where the financing is going to come from and how the rules will be set up for large-scale cooperation on reducing deforestation. So let's go on to Substa now. As I said, what we really are hoping to see, and we expect, I think, to see, Josefina's got probably a little bit better intelligence, and we can take any questions about where we actually, what see actually come out, but we do see the technological and methodological package either being completed or very close to being completed. And we're also hoping that with some of the most recent meetings that REDD is going to be starting to be integrated into other aspects of the emerging treaty. And this might be under, we're seeing more work under the Subsidiary Body for implementation. We're even seeing linkages to adapt funds that are coming out. So once the technical work gets, excuse me, once the technical work gets sort of tied together, the other major thing that we'd like to see come out of the Substa process is that embedded in various other parts of the negotiations. So that's the first point. I guess the second point is WWF has always seen reference levels as a really critical turning point and leverage piece to have REDD continue to make some of the progress and advances that we've seen in the past years. The reason for this is that reference levels allow REDD subnational or national programs to be evaluated whether they're successful. So as REDD becomes more of a performance-based idea for conservation rather than the majority of funding, which has been sort of aid-based or readiness, we really see that the reference levels are a very critical technical component. And they also need to be in place first before other things are fully developed, like MRV systems or monitoring systems, because the reference levels will sort of inform those other technical components. So the last major part that needs to be wrapped up at Substa 39 is the technical assessment. So there's already been guidance provided to countries about how to submit subnational or national reference levels. There was also a call, I think it was in Durban, to have the negotiators decide how submitted reference levels would be assessed. And this is now at least a year or two late. So there's some pretty complicated or detailed text that was left on the table at the last negotiations in June. So we expect to see this assessment process get tied up. We also, I guess the third major point is we do see also since about a year and a half ago, since Durban again, we really see the technical components being much better integrated in the decisions that the parties are developing. So up until about a year and a half ago, you saw these very discrete decisions that were sort of evolving forward, and Peter Graham, who's the chair of the technical negotiations, has done a really remarkable job making sure levels are then informing the MRV, and the MRV and the NFMS are all related through linkage in the decisions. So this is something that we are going to continue to support. And we also need to sort of see how the non-carbon benefits and the safeguard reporting systems also get strengthened and embedded in other systems. So moving on, one of the most important things, as I mentioned, is the technical assessment for forest reference emission or forest reference levels. I guess the first thing to note is all of the decision language carries these two terms, forest reference emission levels and or forest reference levels, but the negotiators were never able to decide on a definition to formally differentiate them. So in general, most people have collapsed the term just to reference levels. And so if you're talking about REDD, in general we use the acronym RLs, and that sort of covers the gamut of language that parties have used in the past to talk about, obviously a reference level is some sort of tons of CO2 per year that are emitted or sequestered from the land use sector in a particular place. So as I said before, the guidance has already been provided to countries. A lot of countries, many people on this call actually I think are probably working on developing and supporting reference levels that are being submitted to the CCC or to the World Bank or to other funders. So this decision is really important. And the reason, even though it's a sort of nerdy component, the reason it's so important is even though the CCC is somewhat of a slow or uncertain process, it's absolutely critical that there is a global brain looking at reference levels. Because if you can imagine, if Norway was having its own way to assess reference levels, and the U.S. government had its own ways, and the voluntary market had their own ways, and the World Bank, different funds had their own ways, you could come up with different reference levels for similar plots of area or even the same plots of area. And this would, fundamentally degrade the confidence that REDD can be something new and different and innovative and performance-based. So even though there's no funding within the CCC right now and there's no REDD mechanism formally declared, having the technical architecture for countries to submit information on their stocks and flows and activity data and emission factors, and then have the global architecture, the CCC, actually evaluating these reference levels is really critical. So there's a draft decision. It's several pages long, and that draft decision lays out things such as the objectives of the reference level assessment, the scope, general procedures, how teams would be comprised, and the current language excuse me, calls for sort of a balanced team of experts from a roster that the UN Secretariat holds and develops. And we do note that there's also a need to have more experts nominated from their countries. If we start to see a handful or even a dozen or two reference levels come in the next year or two, there's probably going to be some capacity constraints in terms of the Secretariat being able to actually develop teams that are balanced and people who are both not biased or involved in the country's reference level, but also that there's a balanced team from developed and developing countries. The draft decision also goes into great detail, actually, about sort of a process where once a country submits a reference level, then the Secretariat shares the information and develops a team, and then the team can ask some questions, and it requires the country to come back with some answers. And it goes through, several-month process that ultimately would result in a decision being reached. And this decision be recorded in a report that the assessment team would do. And we do believe that it's implicit, although this is one of the issues that may be talked about in Warsaw, that the report would settle on one particular number. So if a country submits a reference level, and that reference level maybe has a range of assumptions or a range of models or a range of tons of carbon that are being emitted, but its intervals. We are hoping, and we think, based on some of the discussions we've had with negotiators, that these reports would actually land on a particular number, saying country X or subnational area X is assessed to have a reference level of a particular amount of CO2 that are emitted. So The other critical issue that there still needs to be some work on under the procedures for the technical assessment is that the actual negotiating text that's on the table was drawn from a previous reference level assessment for Annex 1 countries, for the developed countries. But that process was slightly different, actually different in quite a few ways. First of all, it's different in that the countries that are putting forward REDD programs and reference levels have no compliance obligation. And the second is that because of the decisions around REDD, reference levels have already been programmed into the CCC system as an iterative process. So countries are encouraged to submit one reference level, and as they get better information, or they get better satellite images, or they take more measurements in the field, or even just the guidance becomes clearer, they're encouraged to resubmit them. This is different than the reference level assessment for developed countries, which happened in the past. So right now the language says it calls just on the Secretariat to issue a report about the reference levels that have been submitted, but one of the things WWF will be working on is to clarify that language so that the Secretariat is encouraged, or mandated actually, I should say, to submit ongoing reports that as reference levels continue to be submitted and evaluated and approved, the Secretariat should be updating that information in a synthesis report. So that is the technical assessment for the reference levels. The second other thing that parties should be working on, and we expect them to be working on, and we hope they'll be reaching an agreement on, is the MRV platform. And as folks on this call know, once we have a reference level and sort of a baseline of emissions, countries are also going to need to go out and measure and report how many emissions do occur in their countries or in their subnational regions during a particular period of time. And once they do that, then it needs to go through this very sticky and contentious verification process. And verification is causes all sorts of angst in this convention, not just in REDD, but at large. It's one of the reasons that the Copenhagen Agreement really collapsed on itself in the end. So in many ways, REDD is pushing this process farther and faster than any other sector. So as you can imagine, that creates challenges for negotiators. And in Doha, Qatar, the last COP, we really saw countries and blocks of countries really draw a line in the sand and say we're not willing to cross this line, and unfortunately those red lines were too far apart, so the negotiations actually stopped on REDD and they couldn't advance and make an agreement. So there's been a lot of soul searching and hand holding and you know, people having prayer circles or vigils or happy events where people and parties can come together and talk about various sort of advances might be possible at this COP. And the current vibe that's being sort of pushed forward is that the verification for REDD would build off the ICA process, which is how developed countries will be, I guess you could say, monitored, how their climate obligations or climate actions would be monitored over time. The critical thing to recognize and to sort of be honest with ourselves about is that the ICA itself was never intended to verify REDD. It's still an emerging larger component of the international. It's very likely to continue to be a difficult conversation. Countries don't like to tie things to things that are not built because it can sort of, the negotiations can start to trip on themselves. So that's probably going to be the most difficult process and discussion, but as I said, there's a lot of people, a lot of governments that are trying to think creatively about how verification can be advanced at this COP. So that's where a lot of the action is going to be. I guess the other main category of things are what I call, or what we call, these light decisions. And it's not that these issues are less important, it's just that in the grand arc of negotiations, this is not the COP for these other issues, and these are the issues on the bottom of the slide. And so in the past, there's been some very soft language which doesn't really take these issues, national forest monitoring systems, social safeguard systems, information systems, and drivers of deforestation. It's just that these are topics that are still a little bit evolving, and parties aren't quite certain where they really want to take these or how far they want to take them. But we will see a little bit of movement and progress, and probably some fights and differences that will happen on these other light decisions. So with that, I'll end there and maybe just conclude really quickly. You can sort of read it up on the slide yourself, but we do hope that the technical guidance for reference levels will be completed, and that countries will start submitting reference levels, and in turn that will help some of the donor countries to pledge new finance. One other important component that is probably going to start to happen is that the CCC REDD web platform, it's already built, it's already part of decisions, that this is where reference levels and other forms of cooperation could go, so we're hoping to see that become a more dynamic space. WWF has always said that we really see the technical demands on REDD country as being quite substantial. Some of the work that's being done in developing countries is actually more advanced than we've seen in some developed countries. So we really hope that, and we encourage donors to continue to provide both the technical and the financial resources to develop national forest monitoring systems and MRV platforms and reference levels and the whole range of things that countries have been asked to do. And really, we're also starting to communicate and share with other people that the technical components have really moved forward, maybe slower than we would have liked, but they are being tied up. And now we really need to have some very mature conversations about finance and institutions, and a REDD mechanism and a total agreement, and this will show that the CCC can continue to actually move large-scale emission reductions forward. So that's it for Substa. I'll turn it over to Josefina. Sorry. Hi, Josefina.
Hi, Jonah. Thank you so much for that, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Well, we are now going to move forward to another discussions under the convention that are important for REDD. The other two tracks that Jonah was explaining in the overview. The first one is the joint Substa SBI process. This process was established on Doha in the last COP, but unfortunately during the subsidiary body session in June, the joint process could not start discussions because of the problem with SBI adoption of the agenda, and so we didn't have any sessions over the summer. However, there was a workshop that was mandated by the COP that took place, and some of the discussions started. But that means that there's a lot of work to do in Warsaw, and we need to promote that there's significant progress made in this negotiation track. I guess in general, there are a couple of points that we should have in our mind. There was clearly a general consensus on the need to improve effectiveness and coordination at all levels with respect to the financial avenues for REDD Plus activities, which was one of the items on the agenda of this process. So I believe this is good news. There was no question about that, the fact that we do need to promote coordination of support. So I believe that a decision around this issue should encourage developed and developing parties to strengthen systems to communicate the needs and the allocation of support. This by itself, in our opinion, would be a great way to find out what are the gaps and how these gaps need to be filled in, and how can we lower transaction costs. There's been a recurrent preoccupation and concern from REDD countries about the different requirements and different rules that multilateral organizations require for accessing support for REDD. So there's really an interest on having more coordination and simplifying the rules and promoting or facilitating access to support. So I guess it's good news that that there's a consensus on this. It's just a matter of what kind of decision can we expect from Warsaw around this issue, and I believe a system for communicate the needs and the allocation of support would be very helpful. The other general issue is that there has been admitted that there's a lot of overlap between the joint Substa and SBI process with the COP work program. And because there's a lot of overlap, there's also the risk of having two parallel discussions about the same things or things that are very related. So we want to encourage parties to really resolve these overlaps between the negotiation track and the COP work program, but very important, without leaving out any agenda item related to the REDD plus finance discussions, because these discussions need to have a house and need to be taking place seriously and need to move forward. So now, in more specific terms, I guess parties, when considering the need of specific institutional arrangements or potential governance alternatives for REDD plus, which is one of the mandates of this negotiation track, parties need to take into account different situations that are already taking place. One is the fact that the technical analysis and guidance for REDD plus is already taking place in Substa and in the joint SBI Substa process, as Jonah was explaining to us some moments ago, and some of the discussions that are expected to happen in this joint process, guidance and technical analysis for REDD is under discussion in these two tracks of the negotiation. So we are covered there. REDD at some point sooner than later, hopefully, will have to be anchored to the UNFCCC by finding it a place in the ADP work streams, both pre and post 2020. And this is very important. I mean, why we are insisting in anchoring REDD into the convention in this way is because we really need to guarantee the predictability of REDD plus finance. And as it is right now, discussions under the COP work program are not really sending the right signal that we really need to anchor REDD in the convention, and this is here to stay and is going to be part of the broader climate architecture. But there are a lot of potential opportunities to anchor REDD in different discussions. And this is the next point. There are discussions taking place in other groups under the convention that are very relevant for REDD, such as the discussions in the Green Climate Fund, the new market-based mechanism, NAMAS, the Standing Committee of Finance, and other discussions that we need to really make a stop in the way and really explore the appropriate links that need to be established between REDD and these other discussions. And finally, another consideration is that the Green Climate Fund will perform functions that will apply to REDD plus, so we should not try to prejudge, or we should not forget that these decisions in other groups under the convention will affect REDD, hopefully in a positive way. So it's not that the REDD parties or the REDD negotiators need to decide on everything, but just to set up the building blocks on how the linkages are going to be made and send the right signals to the other groups that are discussing topics that are going to be super relevant for REDD. So I believe these considerations are important because parties really need to understand that it is really necessary to discuss what functions need to be fulfilled before discussing about the form or about what are the needs in terms of institutional arrangements under the convention. Until we don't understand really what are the functions that need to be fulfilled, we feel like it's not the right moment to discuss whether we need, for example, a REDD plus committee or any other governance body. Probably it's not the right moment. It's better to work in the functions and identifying the needs. And well, the second point that will need to be considered by parties, and really we would like to encourage this, is parties need to ensure to look ways to ensure the provision of adequate and predictable support to developing countries. And this is beyond the Fast Start funding and the Fast Start phase, the readiness phase, and would include financial and technical support. And we believe that there's been a lot of work, ongoing work in the technical discussions, and we are very close to finalize the design elements, but there's not a balanced discussion when it comes to finance, and we would really like to see this moving forward and looking for ways to ensure that the provision of adequate and predictable support will be there. Next please. Okay, so well, that was for the joint SBI Substa process, and as I mentioned, there was no contact group in June in Bonn, so we really are expecting that this track of the negotiations need to move forward fast, and that countries will need to really work on that, looking for consistency and minimizing overlaps with the COP work program. Which this COP work program, as you may remember, was established in Doha in the last COP, and the mandate was that the COP work program will look for ways and means to deliver results-based payments, would look at ways to incentivize non-carbon benefits, and would look at ways to coordinate support for phase 3 of REDD. And the way to to operationalize this, according to the decision in Doha, was going to be through two workshops under the convention. These two workshops took place, one over the subsidiary bodies intersessional in June, and the second one took place in August as well, also in Bonn. I believe the second workshop was more substantial. There were many interesting discussions, and there was some steps forward to try to define what are the needs in terms of architecture, financial architecture for it. So for WWF, it's going to be very important in Warsaw that parties really sit and consider specific elements for the results-based architecture for REDD. We have discussed a lot of regarding the enabling conditions and all the conditions that need to be in place and the capacities that need to be built, but we need to move forward to more concrete discussions on what are the elements that this results-based architecture should consider for REDD, regardless the discussions on the Green Climate Fund, and without prejudging these very important discussions, but there are certain things that REDD can move forward. So parties will have to hopefully unblock the current discussions on results-based finance, and by agreeing on ways and means to deliver results-based payments. We believe that it's going to be important, and parties in general acknowledge that we will have to meet ex-ante and ex-post payments in order to actually deliver results. If there is no also ex-ante payments, it's going to be harder for countries to produce results. Because there are many elements that need to be supported in order to reach phase 3, such as the sustainability of all the technical requirements that Jonah just was walking us through. Also, I guess it's going to be very important to acknowledge that commitments towards REDD plus finance must move beyond the existing fast start period to include both the mid and long terms. Yes, there are pledges, but there are not clear signals on how REDD is going to exist in the long term, and there should be clear commitment, and there should be political will to show that the support is going to be there. And this is not only important under the convention, but also it's important to send the right signs outside the convention for all the REDD plus activities that are ongoing on the ground. It's important for countries to have a certainty that the support will be there, and that the adequate and predictable support is committed. So for us it's very important that there is a decision that acknowledges this. The next point, it's about the consistency with this joint Substa and SBI process that I just described, because there's a lot of overlap. So we really need to find ways to improve coordination of REDD plus results-based finance without creating parallel discussions, but actually in consistency with the joint Substa SBI process, and working to improve coordination not only in the readiness phase but also in all phases. This is going to be important to lower down transaction costs and to facilitate REDD implementation in the ground. And finally, it's very uncertain what is going to happen with the COP work program. Since the mandate was only to have these 2 workshops, it may be the case that the COP work program is closed now in Warsaw. However, if this happens, we really believe that there is a need of clarifying a roadmap and the body to continue discussions on REDD plus results-based finance. If this is not ensured and if there is no clarity on where the discussions on REDD plus finance are going to be taking place, we believe that the REDD momentum is going to fade very quickly in the REDD countries. And it's hard enough to build commitment across sectors and show that REDD can work. And if we don't have really certainty that this issue is going to be resolved under the convention, and there's really a political will to keep discussing how the support is going to be delivered, then it is going to be very tough to maintain the momentum. Next, please. Okay, so that was for the negotiation tracks. John explained Substa, and I explained the other 2 tracks, the joint SDI and Substa process and the COP work program. And then one thing we wanted to communicate to you is that for WWF it's very, very important to work in integrating REDD plus to the other discussions under the UNFCCC. We have been very lucky that REDD has been moving faster in comparison to other issues under the convention. And this is very good, and I believe that there are a lot of lessons learned and good practices that can be taken into consideration for other discussions on the other sectors and bodies under the convention. But for us, we have reached a point in which we need to establish the links of REDD with other discussions. We need more alignment and integration of REDD into the broader climate architecture. This is right now not very clear, like REDD has been moving more independently, but we need to integrate this into the broader climate architecture and guarantee that REDD is going to be part of the global deal. Therefore, well, parties need to start anchoring REDD to the convention by exploring and establishing linkages to other bodies and negotiation tracks. For example, the most relevant ones that come into mind are the work program on long-term finance, the standing committee on finance, the new market-based mechanisms, non-market-based approaches, NAMAs, etc. So we would like to encourage parties in Warsaw to do so and to send the signals to impact design and operation of the Green Climate Fund. Discussions in the Green Climate Fund are starting, and even when we are just talking about a couple of windows, adaptation and mitigation, the Green Climate Fund may be looking for ways to really make things happen in terms of results-based finance. And REDD has advanced so much that it's in a good position to send the right signals and say, well, these are the building blocks and these are kind of like the modalities that would work for REDD and maybe for other sectors as well. So it's important to start building a more, like fluid dialogue with the Green Climate Fund discussions. And yeah, just finally, we would like to recommend including REDD Plus in the deliberations of the ADP, and it would be ideal if it can be done pre and post 2020. And to conclude and to open the floor for questions, I guess it's important to recognize that REDD Plus is at a crossroads. We really need to finalize the methodological package of the design elements for REDD to provide a good the guidance that countries need to move forward on the ground, but we also have to balance out with the discussions on finance, showing clear political will and commitment for finance. We have to recognize as well that without REDD+, the 2 degrees target is unlikely to be achieved, and this is a reality. We have also to recognize that regardless the pace of the negotiations under the UNFCCC, there are more than 100 REDD activities in progress in many, many countries. More than 45 countries are developing right now their national REDD strategies. And however, we do have high levels of uncertainty in terms of REDD+ finance for the interim period. It means from now until 2020, we know that we have support of the multilateral channels, but there's no really clarity on what is going to happen beyond 2020. And this is very important to maintain the momentum of REDD. So yeah, just to repeat, REDD needs to be embedded in the broader climate architecture. And also one thing that we need to recognize is that we need to have political will to move REDD ahead. This is one of the main conclusions of the REDD+ exchange that was held in Oslo last week. There was a consensus among the participants that what we really need right now to keep moving things forward is to show the political will and to show that REDD is possible. And with that, yeah, we conclude, and probably we will open the floor for questions. Bryn, back to you.
Yes, thank you. So thank you again to Jono and Josefina for those great presentations. And as Josefina mentioned, we are now open for questions. So you can submit your questions using the toolbar, the panel to the right, and we have some time for those. So to get us started, this first question is for Jono, and the question is, what are specific decisions on RLs or MRV that WWF views as essential to success? Jono, over to you.
I think for the reference level, the most important thing that we still need to finish is the assessment process. So there have already been a series of decisions and annexes and guidance, a fairly robust indication for countries that want to do REDD, performance-based REDD, how to submit a reference level and what to include into it. So really the critical thing is getting the assessment tied up. And on the assessment, as I mentioned earlier, some of the most critical things to complete are this back and forth, which is sort of a, it's for UN, it's a fairly long text, and it's a very prescriptive process. It says, you know, countries should submit a reference level, and then the Secretariat does these things, and then an assessment team gets formed. So in terms of the real specific things, we want to make sure that that process and those particulars are well articulated, and that they move the process forward. I guess, and Josefina may have some other thoughts about this, but personally, I think it's also really important, and I'm not sure there's been a whole lot of conversations about this, but once all of this technical work goes into the reference level development and all of this work goes into the assessment of a reference level and a report is issued, what happens to that report? As Josefina said earlier, we're advocating and hoping to see REDD get sort of integrated into all the other componentry of the CCC, especially the Green Climate Fund. So you can imagine over the next year or two, if we can tie up the technical components and reference levels get assessed, the really big, not 64,000 but $64 billion question is what happens to these assessments. So countries, we believe that our emissions would be this over a particular period of time. The Secretariat and the CCC assess that, and they issue a report. Then that number has to go somewhere to get financed and integrated into commitments. And so that's a really important thing that we're going to be paying attention to.
Great, thank you. So the next question I think is most likely for Josefina. So the question is, Josefina, would it be appropriate to create a committee for REDD+ under the UNFCCC?
Thanks, Bryn. Well, as I was trying to explain, we don't know yet if we need a committee for REDD because we don't need what are the functions that need to be fulfilled. Since REDD is interlinked with many other discussions under the convention. For example, what Jonah was explaining, that REDD is going to adopt ICA for the kind of like verification of results, that is ICA is for NAMAs. And there's going to be some discussions about the registry for NAMAs as well. So we don't know if we need right now a committee, so what we need to do is actually explore more seriously the linkages to other discussions under the convention and to try to be efficient and not creating new bodies and bureaucracy if we don't need it. So I guess the first thing to do is actually to understand why would you need a committee? What are the functions that we are missing? What are the things that we need to be embedding into the convention? What are the activities or what are the tasks and who needs to be performing them? Is there any other body or structure under the convention that can assume these responsibilities or not? But until then, we really believe that it's very premature to talk about the creation of a committee if we cannot really first explore the linkages, acknowledge that the technical and analysis discussions are already happening in Substa, and now with the joint process Substa and SBI, and the Green Climate Fund has been mandated with a lot of functions that are going to be applying for it. So we really need to probably pause a little bit and to really understand what is what we need, and then we can discuss the form. And if it is a REDD committee, well, good. But until then, we have to really be careful about not creating structures without any purpose or without any reason.
Great, thank you. So the next question comes from Sebastian, and Sebastian asks, what are the issues that may lead negotiations to collapse? And as you decide who wants to tackle that first, I'm just going to advance the slides so we can have some other REDD resources up here. So over to you, either Josefina or Jono. What are the issues that may lead negotiations to collapse?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know, Jono, I just want to give it a shot, but I guess if parties are unable to agree on a verification process for REDD, again, because it happened already in Doha, and there was no decision coming out from Substa because there was no possibility to reach an agreement on what would be the process for verification of results. If this happens again in Warsaw, this is going to be disastrous. We are hoping that we are seeing that the discussions in the intersessional were very healthy, and there was political will to move forward with the technical assessment of reference levels. So we really are hoping that the discussions on that end will move fast. But if not, I believe that REDD is going to put at risk big time. And also, if parties are unable to move forward with the discussions on finance and the methodological package progressed, again, I think that this is going to be the end of REDD, because we are already perceiving a lack of interest in the REDD countries because they are not receiving the support they need, and they are not seeing clear that they will be receiving the support they need to sustain all this methodological package in the long term. So if countries keep being silent in the negotiations on finance, this has been the case for the past year at least, we have a place to discuss on these issues, and all developing and developed countries are strange, they are very silent. So if there are no concrete proposals and there is no really a display of political will to move forward with the financial aspects, I believe that this is going to make the negotiations collapse. But I don't know if Jono has another point.
No, I think, Josefina, you covered it. I think, I guess the only thing to add there, Sebastian, is that what Josefina talked deal breakers. As we've learned over the years, there are other deal breakers, often more likely deal breakers that happen outside of the REDD discussion. So with Poland hosting this COP, anything is possible. Expectations are fairly low for this presidency, or even lower than zero for this presidency. There's been a whole bunch of conversations that there'll be a coal summit that Poland is also hosting at the same time. So just sometimes the presidency or the particulars of the process that is established in a country that is not the most progressive can just sort of slow everything up and that's kind of at the top level. We also see Russia has been very upset since Qatar about procedural issues. So they've primarily blocked the SBI, the Subsidiary Body for Implementation, from working. And this has actually helped the Substa process, the stuff that I covered. But in general, the real deal breakers are larger issues than that for these negotiations. And then, you know, Josefina talked a lot about deal breakers for REDD if we don't see progress on that would really sort of cut into the momentum behind REDD.
Great, thank you. So the next question comes from Valerie, and it's a bit of a related question. So Valerie asks, what is the current political mood and will for REDD+? What are the energy levels and optimism levels for moving this along? What countries are championing REDD, and are there countries that are strongly against it? So Josefina or Jana, does either of you want to jump on that first?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, it is a little bit related to the previous question. I would say that after Doha, we were all very, very concerned of what was going to be the future of REDD under the convention, because we, for the first time in many years, we were unable to reach a decision under Substa. And if we don't finish the design elements, there's no REDD, right? REDD won't exist. However, it was very surprising in a good way in June in the intersessional where the subsidiary bodies met to discuss. The REDD group was working really, really good. I mean, they were working nonstop. They worked almost every day for many, many days, twice per day. They were meeting, they were drafting in the nights. There was, in my opinion, they show commitment, and they show that they were really wanting to unlock this issue and find a way forward. So I guess the mood within the negotiators is really good. I believe they show commitment in Bonn, and I hope to see the same level of commitment in Warsaw. There are many countries moving forward with proposals. I believe, well, as always, Norway and Brazil have been putting concrete proposals in the table. Brazil has been one of the few countries proposing specific elements for architecture for REDD, financial architecture for REDD, and ways and means to deliver results-based payments. But there are other countries that have been very active and very positive, such as Colombia, that has been trying to map out a little bit these linkages with other bodies of the convention, as well as Mexico. Thailand has been also very active in the discussions. The European Union, of course, always proposing some ideas in the table. The US, the Coalition for Race First Nations as well, related to the issue of governance. So yeah, there's a good level of participation of many countries. Some other countries participate in blocs, like the LDCs have been also very outspoken with regard to issues such as non-carbon benefits. So yeah, I would say that we have a good level of participation. What is lacking is more concrete ideas for the discussions on finance, I guess.
Great, thank you. So the next question is for Jono, I think. Yeah, it's probably best for you. So the question is, the presentation seemed to focus on things like reference levels and measurement, reporting, and MRV. Why not on social safeguards and non-carbon benefit?
I think that's that the negotiations themselves are. We've seen a lot of there's a lot of hype and excitement around REDD, and there's a lot of people have pinned all sorts of expectations on this idea that's still really, as Josefina and I have noted, there's still no REDD mechanism. There's still no REDD finance that's actually contained within the CCC. So, so I think at this point, there are a lot of, everyone has recognized that things like non-carbon benefits and social safeguard systems are absolutely essential for both the perception of REDD and for the implementation of REDD. If social systems or communities are being disrupted or antagonized or punished by REDD, the the vocal NGO community and the donors and just the ability of information to move quickly will really, draw scorn and things like that if social safeguards are not recognized. At the same time, while those are really critical things, the CCC cannot prescribe to countries certain things like how to treat its indigenous people or how to value biodiversity. So these are conversations that are really important. They're also really delicate, and what we've tended to see over the past sort of 5 years is that it's easier to advance technical and process-based questions, and that's where the bulk of the decision making happens. When it comes to softer, important social issues, we tend to see very minimal text, and that reflects the fact that countries are fairly sensitive when it comes to any sort of treaty prescribing these types of things. And Josefina, you might have some other thoughts on that too.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. I just to complement what you just said, I mean, it's important also to recognize, and maybe we didn't clarify this at the beginning, but there was an agreement among parties to discuss in Warsaw the issues of reference level and MRVs with a focus on the verification issue. And there was an agreement to leave the topic of non-carbon benefits and the non-market-based approaches for the intersessional in Bonn, because there's going to be a call for submissions. I believe that the call for submissions is going to be for March, so countries can actually submit their views on these two topics, and we can actually move forward with these discussions in the next session of Substa. There was an agreement in June that regarding three decisions. The national monitoring systems, national forest monitoring systems, the safeguards regarding to the time and frequency of the reports on safeguards, and the issue of drivers of deforestation. There are three drafts of these decisions that have been forwarded for adoption by the COP in Warsaw. So really there's no agenda item on these other issues to be discussed in Warsaw, and that was the agreement among the parties. So that's why we decided to focus a little bit the discussions on the topics that are going to be discussed in Warsaw. So I hope this helps also clarify a little bit.
Yes, that's great clarification. Thank you. So we're nearing the end of the time we have allotted for today's session. So as we come to a close, I just want to bring your attention to a few of these resources that you're seeing up on the screen. So the first is if you liked this presentation, or if you want more information about WWF REDD+ work and UNFCCC, you can visit the URL there and get access to all of the policy briefs and reports related to climate negotiations. As I mentioned, an archive of this session will be available for you to watch or to share with colleagues. REDD Community is our free online learning platform. And then REDD Resource Digest and Canopy are two weekly and quarterly email updates we send out. And you can always find more information on our website. And again, please feel free to stay connected with us. You can follow us on Twitter. Visit our website. You can always send us an email. And with that, I just want to say thank you again to Josefina and to Jono for presenting to us today. It was great. And thank you again for your time. And we'll see you at the next learning session. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Josefina and Jono.
Thank you, Rin, and thanks everybody for connecting.
Thanks, everybody, for connecting.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.